All right, so I guess it just skipped the rest of the stuff that we had for the intro, but that's all right. Welcome to the Wisdom of the Immortals podcast. I'm Peter. I'm here with Ryan,
How you doing?
and we're going to be talking about the Mayan Underworld, Xibalba, the place of fear. So I had a little bit more of an intro planned out for this, but it didn't come through due to technical difficulties, and we'll just go ahead and jump right into everything from here, I guess. So the Mayan people had a belief in a physical underworld, not so much the same type of underworld you would have in the Christian Bible, for example, where it's a separate place, something that could be a different plane or realm that you might go to. Where the Mayans believed that you could actually access an underworld through the world that we live in by physical means, such as walking, and they called this underworld Xibalba, which roughly translates into the place of fear. So this already kind of prefaces and sets its tone that this is a place that maybe people who are not brave or not adept at survival would want to try to venture into. And there were a series of perils that one would have to face to venture into this realm that were kind of set up as deterrents. Somewhat similar to the mythology of like Cerberus, the three-headed dog that guards hell, or something of that nature. There's some parallels in the cultural references there between like your Greek and your Roman societies, mythologies, and what the Mayans have with the underworld, where it was something that mortals would occasionally brave to venture into for various reasons. I think we have less information as far as mythology about the Mayan people's ventures into the underworld. More so, just that they believed it was there and it was something that could be done. There were multiple different lords of this domain, and there were 10. Well, excuse me, there were what is it? Do you know offhand, Ryan, how many lords it was? There were like two numbers given. There were like 6 and 10 or something like that.
I think you're correct. 6 and 10.
But I'm trying to look for the information right now. But there were all kinds of just nasty associations these things had with them. Like I'm probably gonna butcher some of these names, but Zakiripat, the Flying Scab, Chuchu McEwick, Gathered Blood, and these were associated with different afflictions or ailments that I'd imagine the Mayan people observed in their everyday lives, and there was at least on some level that kind of a connection with these deities that were associated with suffering and sickness and death that were said to preside over the underworld for the Mayans. And they had a very harsh culture in a lot of ways. Although they were in some regards very what we would consider in modern day to be civilized, is they were great builders. They were these fantastic astronomers who had knowledge of celestial positioning far before and after their time, with almost the same precision that we do in modern times, and that alone is an astounding accomplishment. But at the same time, they're also sacrificing enemies in sports games, and they're bringing people up to do blood sacrifices ritualistically and whatnot. So there's a lot of contrast within that culture as well.
Yeah, they were excellent farmers. That was one thing. Definitely brilliant farmers.
They
And
were they primarily centered around maize back then, around different corn products and things, or
yes,
yeah.
yeah.
Where do we know like what the first culture to really do corn over there? Was it always a thing as far as we know? Does it go back to the Olmecs?
Um, my guess would be that it goes back before that,
Yeah,
but I don't really know offhand.
gotcha. Yeah, that's one of those things. Like I don't really know when that's supposed to have originated. But it seems to be a very prevalent theme, kind of going real far back.
Yeah, well, corn is good, and they
Yeah, and
had
it's a very versatile thing as well. It was pretty much essential to that Mesoamerican region in that time
mhm.
period for sure.
Yeah, that was a staple in their diet, and they supported huge populations in the millions
In the
off of
millions, huh? That's a lot of
corn.
people. I know.
Yeah.
Like I've seen figures on some of the different cities like Tikal and Palenque, and they're all thought to have had roughly at least 100,000 people occupying them
Hmm.
at their heights.
Yep.
It's crazy to think that at some point those people all just kind of abandoned that area at the same time because you had a Mayan you had a set of Mayan dynasties rather, and then you just had no real trace of them after a certain point in time. They just kind of disappeared.
Yeah, I want to say that that there were still cities claiming the name Maya, like still cultures claiming that name during the Spanish Inquisition. Their territory was huge, spread from Mexico down in South America. I don't know exactly, you know, from where to where, but I know that.
Primarily, kind of like it was basically centered around the Yucatan, in the Yucatan Peninsula, and you had it stretched out a little bit west of that, and a little bit, I want to say a little bit south, maybe southeast of that,
Mhm.
but I want to say it was like the Yucatan and in Mexico, and then down to maybe Nicaragua. But it was that kind of whole little pocket where the Yucatan is really was
Mhm.
predominantly Mayan area, and then you had like I said like Tikal, Palenque, you had Chichen Itza was a Mayan building, and Chichen Itza is where some of the cenotes that I looked into are in that area, especially right behind Chichen Itza. There's a cenote, and for those of you who aren't familiar with the term cenote, it's basically an older word from that culture that means sinkhole. So these are sinkholes that are areas that filled in over time with water. Supposedly, as the water levels rose in that region, these sinkholes filled up with water. These are areas that were once accessible by just walking, but now dive teams actually have to go in when they want to research these areas. So there's a lot less done than probably would happen if they were just exposed to the air still. But these areas are underwater caves now that these sinkholes, these cenotes, lead to. And you have expeditions that have gone into these areas to search for not only for evidence of Xibalba of the Mayan Underworld entrance, but of just different things that occur in these areas that we have observed, such as bodies that have become just fragments and skeletons and whatnot, skulls that get found in there. These certainly were places that, at the very least, we can say that human bodies from that culture wound up. We can speculate on the ways that they may have ended up there. That they could have been part of some ritualistic sacrifices. These could just be places that were, assumed to be entrances to the underworld, so they'd help the people get there or something. We don't really know exactly what happened with that, but these bodies did wind up in these cenotes, especially the one behind Chichen Itza, and these are also associated with being the entrances to Xibalba, to the place of fear. And these different instances in the cenotes where these divers they'll go and they'll enter these pools of water and swim into these tunnels to go up into these caverns. There's a large I forget how big of an area it was, but I want to say it was miles of underground caverns that are connected in that kind of Yucatan Peninsula, kind of in that region, stretching on to the west and southwest of there, I believe. And it's a vast cave system that these sinkholes connect. So there's a lot of room for a lot of different mythologies to have come about in a situation like that, regardless of the nature of the origin of these myths. You could definitely see how it could be evocative of underworld vibes, kind of. There's a lot that one's imagination can do with that, regardless of the mythology behind it. And you do see features that are described in some of the mythology that could be interpreted as aspects of the natural features of the cave, like bats residing in the cave. Let me see what the specifics that are listed are. I know one was knives and the stalactites coming from the ceiling could resemble knives, or stalagmites coming up from the ground could as well. And there are those in abundance. Um,
Um,
and then
and
it was said that it was expected that the visitors to Xibalba could greet the seated lords of Xibalba, but we don't know exactly what these lords were or weren't. If these were supposed to be representations of actual deities, or if these were just representatives of those deities. Just Mayans that for whatever reason became deemed such, or what the situation was with that. But or why one would even want to venture into the underworld while they were alive, we don't have the stories for. So it's interesting to think about that. Like, why would somebody actually want to go to the underworld while they're alive? They're not. I can't think of many reasons. There's a few that we have from other mythologies. I'm trying to recall. There's one from I think from is it from Greek mythology where somebody went to go like rescue. There was a woman who got taken by Hades, I think, and somebody had to go rescue her from the underworld.
I'm
It's all
not too
right.
well read on Greek mythology.
There's a story from one of those mythologies about that. But there aren't many mythological stories I can think of where people really want to venture into the underworld. Usually you want to avoid going there. So it's interesting the relationship they had with it. That there would be a reason to go there. It could be that maybe you had a lost loved one and you want to go. You want to get advice from them or convey a message. I don't know. It's hard to say. It might be something more mundane like that. Maybe representatives were the people who actually sat at the end of these things. Maybe these things were all just like kind of like what we would consider a church in modern day. Instead of going in like a Catholic church, somebody would go in and repent for their sins to the priest in the little box. It could be like these caves were like kind of like going through a repentance process for these people. It's difficult to speculate on, but it's definitely fascinating. A lot of the information that we did have that related to this was destroyed by the Spanish when they came in. They because these people engaged in human sacrifice, the Maya engaged in sacrifice. Uh, it was a lot of their writings were considered to be heretical, and when these devoutly Catholic Spanish people came into the area, these missionaries and preachers and what have you came into the area. They believed that it was their duty to root out this heresy that they found, and that no one should be doing the types of things that they encountered. So everything there had to be evil by default. So they decided they had to remove a lot of this, and that's something that's been kind of a prevalent theme in history. Is that if you don't like the history of a culture, you just burn it or just destroy it in other ways, and you kind of inject your own culture, and you create a kind of hybrid culture between the two, where certain aspects are always going to be there. Certain aspects are genetically imprinted on that people by then, but then you have the European stuff that gets added into the mix as well, and you see that with the situation with the Mayas. You see that with when Alexandria was sacked, and vast stores of knowledge were destroyed with that. So it's a really interesting topic as well. That just a lot of things that we could have information about, we don't, because of that fear, that needing to control. When you move into a land of another culture, that you can't really inflict your own culture upon it when theirs is fully intact. It doesn't really work historically. I think even the Romans, despite doing that, were aware of that because they had aspects of other cultures that they had conquered. They would build into the capital. So there were always people being mindful of the fact that you could only do so much Romanizing of conquered peoples without them probably rebelling or just not taking to your ideals. And then they could only really spread so far. They only got to what was it, Hadrian's Wall, and what's now the UK, and they didn't really want to go further than that. It seemed because they felt that the people in that region were too wild for them and just not worth their trouble. And I think that was a funny way of saying they were just like, you know what, these people are too alien to us, they're too different. We don't even want to invade y'all anyway. just
Lucky for them.
we'll put a big wall up and keep you out. I mean, they charge them taxes to cross the wall still. They got some money from them, but they're like, we're not going to invade you. We're just going to put a toll bridge up.
I guess that's better than invaders coming in and killing your children,
Well, I mean, I
raping.
think they tried, if I recall, and it was kind of like, it's kind of like when we went into Vietnam. Like, we didn't really know how to deal with that type of warfare and terrain, and we don't
Right.
know what the Romans really encountered when they got over there. They could have had, for all we know, they could have had Merlin's great grandson with them. We don't know what they had, and we don't know what types of methods they were using other than what the Romans talked about. So we only have a few accounts as far as I know of that. I don't think there's many. But they got over there, and the people that they ended up dealing with, I forget if it was the Celts or the Picts or who it was, but the Romans were just like, nah, just fuck this, man. We're not doing this. They're like, we're gonna put up this big wall. I want to say it was Hadrian was the guy who built Hadrian's Wall, I believe. And they just put up this big wall where they manned the wall and they charged anybody tax if they were trying to go through and harassed them and just whatever. But yeah, they were just like, we're just gonna build. This is gonna be the edge of Rome right here. We're just gonna build this in your country. What do you think happened to the Mayans when they left all their places? Do you think they all went underground and went to Xibalba together to live happily ever
Um,
after?
I mean, I've read some things on that. Some people say drought, which if you can't support those populations, people are just going to leave. They're gonna find some other way to help their families survive. A lot of them probably just died. Maybe it had to do with some government upheaval. People weren't happy with the way things were being run. Could be a lot of things.
I mean, as far as drought goes, you said they were pretty heavily into farming as a society, so I think that would definitely be something that would factor in if that did come into play.
Yes, definitely.
And as far as like the government upheaval thing goes, I would think though you would probably just you would lose mostly just the people at the top in that case. That's how revolutions tend to work out, unless they're quashed. I mean, revolutions tend to work out that you're gonna have a coup and you're gonna lose the people in the top primarily, and the
That's
rest of the
true.
people will just kind of fall into suit when the others replace the ones at the top. So I don't know if that would necessarily be something that would cause the whole place to just disappear or everybody just kind of leave like that, mass exodus style.
That's
But
true. I would definitely lean more towards environmental factors.
yeah, yeah, I would think that possibly disease also,
That's true.
because you did have the European influence come in. That was known for causing widespread pandemic within the people that were already here. So that's something that definitely could have impacted the Mayans. Because it's just like after a certain point in time, there's not really anything. It just seems like they let the buildings grow over and we're gone. And I don't think we've sufficiently proven that they all died in that spot either. So I think it seems like there was some type of an exodus.
Yeah, yeah. You would imagine that you would if you'd imagine that you would see some evidence of plague
Yeah,
or
because
find that.
you're gonna find the bodies of these people, and you're gonna be able to find some type of
Yes,
evidence of that. I mean,
and probably
even like societies
traces
like
of disease as well.
even like Vesuvius and Pompeii, you can find the people who are still like frozen in ash, just like suspended in place, basically.
Hmm. Yeah, that must have been a bad day for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Vesuvius erupting.
Well, and I don't think they had, but probably a very short amount of time to realize that was even going on. I think there were a lot of people that seemed to have gotten caught off guard by that. You don't have people who are investigating that type of thing all the time like we do nowadays. We have scientists who just work on that type of thing, year round now. And
Yes.
we get social media, we get the update on our phone if that's gonna happen now. So it's a much different scenario, like we get the beep on our phone that the emergency's happening now. So
Yeah, back in the day, they kind of just dealt with it as it came.
yeah,
I
I
can't
mean,
imagine.
back then the best you would probably
Can't
get
imagine a
is
worse way to.
you would get an astronomer who could predict that there was going to be a celestial event or something like that, and I don't think you really get much past that.
Yeah, you're only going to get so far with naked eye astronomy.
Yeah, I mean, you can go talk to the Oracle if you're willing to take the pilgrimage there, or consult a
Yeah, but
shaman or something like that. You had options. They weren't as
they're
advanced as
they're
what we have necessarily today, but you had options.
if you go talk to an oracle, they're going to want half your food. They're going to want to fuck your wife.
You never know, man. I think that's gonna vary from culture to culture, probably too. So
That's true. I feel like some people just get in a spot where they take advantage of that sort of power.
it's definitely something that could happen for sure. I'm not really an oracle expert, but I think that's definitely something that could come into play. I mean, I think power is a thing that's been kind of wielded throughout history and has shaped much of it. So I think we wouldn't have as interesting of a topic to go over if it wasn't for power, but it certainly
Hmm.
does a lot of harm as well.
Yeah, well, that's part of being apes. You always got to have those apes who feel like they're stronger and smarter than the rest of us, more capable to make decisions.
Yeah, but that's what drives us forward at the same time. So as goofy and backwards as it can seem at times, it's what pushes us, kind of just recklessly into the future. And it always
Yes,
has. It propels
absolutely right.
us, and it's always gotten us into the next step, because you do have those people who push forward with reckless abandon, and it doesn't always make sense to us, and there's a lot of times where it can just seem that what they're doing is counterintuitive and unwieldy, but at the same time, it's still pushing us
It's still
forward.
pushing us forward.
Momentum is momentum. You know, forward is forward. It's still, we're moving along a timeline either way. So it might not always be graceful, but we're still being propelled forward regardless of what happens.
You're right.
Really, the only thing that changes is the perspective of it, depending on who's doing it and how it's being done and what lens it's being viewed through.
Mm-hmm.
So I found the list of the physical perils that were set up in according to the writings that were set up in the path to Xibalba.
Okay.
The city was home to at least 6 deadly houses filled with trials for visitors. And this is from Wikipedia, so
House for
hopefully it's right. But
visitors.
this seems to be what I
This
remember
from
as
a
well. The first was a dark house, a house that was completely dark inside. The second was a rattling house or a cold house full of bone chilling cold and rattling hail.
so
Um,
rattling hail.
I don't know if I buy that there was hail inside of the cave, but it could have definitely been cold. Maybe there was ice on the top of it and it just kind of fell down sometimes. The third was the jaguar house filled with hungry jaguars. They could have definitely brought some cats into the house. Sure. The fourth was a bat house filled with dangerous shrieking bats. I feel like any shrieking bats can be dangerous in a cave, so that's probably realistic.
That's probably
Then the
realistic.
razor
I
house.
wouldn't want to be the guy responsible. I wouldn't want to be the guy responsible for bringing jaguars down into a cave.
No, he
That
probably
seems.
got eaten sometimes too.
Oh yeah, that seems like a pretty shitty job.
That's probably how they kept the jaguars full when they're not eating the people coming into the house. Is that the guy who brings it in just gets eaten after he's already a
Yeah.
sacrifice. Then the fifth is the razor house that's supposed to be filled with blades and razors that moved about on their own accord. And that's where I say I could really see that being like stalactites and stalagmites. That's one theory I've seen
That's where I say
posed,
I could really see that being like stalactites, stalagmites. That's very I've seen posed.
and that could totally
That,
be
that
that.
makes sense.
That could totally be that.
And then there's a hot house that's supposed to be filled with fires and heat, and they could have set fire in one of the rooms, sure. Um, and it says the purpose of these tests was to either kill or humiliate people placed into them if they could not outwit the test.
They could not outwit the test.
So I mean that could have just been something they had to go through to speak with a representative for the underworld, go to talk to like their call center employee basically. You know, if you want to talk to underworld, you have to call the that's how you reach the end of the 1-800 numbers. You have to go through the knives and the bats and the blood river and all that stuff, and then you get to speak to the supervisor at the end. So the supervisor in this case is just a bloodthirsty monster, you know. Not that I'm not trying to be mean to the Mayan ancestors of people, but these depictions of these things are wicked looking, and they would be considered monsters if we ran into them today for sure. But underworld deities, we'll say, they look pretty monstrous though. But
Yeah, the Mayan depictions of their gods and deities, they're pretty fierce.
yeah,
They're pretty fierce people in general. The Mayans.
yeah.
Yeah.
And they believed really heavily in blood sacrifice. Even with the rulers of the peoples, the rulers would go into this ritualistic thing where they were led into a cave or cavern like area, and they would cut. And I believe I have this right. If I get this wrong, please somebody correct me in the comments. But I believe the Mayan rulers actually slit their foreskin with a
I believe the
blade
Mayans actually slit their foreskin with a
and
blade
would
and
let it bleed
would
in a
let it
ritualistic
bleed
fashion
in a ritualistic
and then be left alone in the dark like sensory deprivation until they had a like a ritual or spiritual experience. And
Yeah,
that's pretty hardcore.
yeah. The the Mayans also have rituals where they would stab stingray barbs to enter a shamanic voyage. Same principle as the bloodletting. They had some weird rituals. Shove tobacco into their rectums,
That
and
is it's it's different.
mushrooms were readily available to them as well. So it's strange that they would utilize those sorts of things.
To kind of
Well,
connect with their
you could just
spirituality.
eat some.
Quality.
Yeah, it's different. Interesting people.
So they not really take part
Take
in
part.
other like means of reaching spiritual states like mushrooms and things that were already available to them, or was it
Yeah,
just less prevalent?
definitely. Yeah, they had mushrooms available, psilocybin mushrooms.
So did they use those ritualistically as well, or are they just doing like the sensory deprivation and tobacco in their buttholes?
No, I believe that they also use mushrooms
Okay,
ritualistically, but maybe it was a situation of like maybe they weren't as available, or they couldn't find them, or that technology was lost where they knew how to tell which mushrooms would take them on a spirit journey and which would just kill them.
yeah,
Yeah,
that makes sense.
makes sense.
What do you think about these death gods,
Think
these
about
underworld
these
deities?
death gods.
As in to as in like
Do you think
are they real,
what do you think
or
these
is it
ultimately
something
were? Do you think
symbolic?
these were just these are just conditions that the people associated with a concentration of worship, or do you think these were some type of physically represented beings, or what do you think, or maybe something in
Represented
between, or
beings,
what?
or they,
I would say something in between. I mean, I have a pretty open mind, so there's always the possibility that these were actual entities that they were describing, or that it's just a personification of divine principles.
For sure. Yeah, it's very hard to say, and I think also there could have been some use of like
it's very hard to
religious
say. I think also there could be
intermediaries,
some use of
these
like
supposed
intermediaries,
entrances to the
you
underworld, where there could have been like a essentially like a priest or a shaman at the end of it that was a representative of
at
say
the end of it, the
a Tukab, the stabbing demon, or the a Halamez, the sweepings demon. You know, you could have had a human that represented these people and acted as an
had
intermediary at the end of
presented
these trials that one would have to go
intermediary,
through,
these trials that
and
through.
you would have
Sure.
access to that
And
deity via this person as the intermediary if you made it through the trials. I could see that being like a ritual that they would undergo.
Oh yeah, definitely. But what is that guy at the end of the tunnel really going to do for you?
Well, at the end of the day, that's going to essentially be the same question you would ask of a modern day priest, right? Like, what does that
the
really
question you
do
would
for
ask of
you?
a modern
What good does that
right?
really
Yeah, very
benefit
true.
you? You know, do they have a connection with that deity? Maybe these people are supposed. Maybe there's people in those places who are supposed to be related to those deities, because you had rulers in that time that were divines during their rule, right? They were essentially made gods living while they were ruling. So I think it's not to me is not a stretch to say that you
Not a
might have
stretch.
had a
Say
priest or a
and
shaman or something at the end of these tunnels or this tunnel that people could go to, or cavern system or what have you, where people can go through these different trials and wind up in a situation where they're face to face with a person who's in mask and costume and probably painted red, or something else dramatic, and they can speak with this person much in the same way someone would with an oracle. Probably speaking with an oracle, you know, when you travel to Delphi and
circle,
made that
you
pilgrimage,
travel to
that was
Delphi,
probably a very
pilgrimage.
eventful
That was
thing and probably a very dramatic and meaningful thing for the people who made it there. and that was something you had to go through. The trek of getting to that place because you didn't have you couldn't just take a jet and an Uber. You had to actually you had to get there. So that was a journey in itself, and
And
those people would go there seeking anything from mundane to great advice because you had that of course featured in mythology as well, where you had heroes going to ask the oracle for advice.
for sure,
And it's
it's really
interesting.
hard.
What are you gonna say?
It's really it's really hard to put yourself into the mind of somebody that lived 1,000 years ago in a completely different environment and completely different culture from
No,
what
it
we are.
is, and we don't. I was just about to say, really, we don't know the true scope of the impact that other cultures may have had on the Mayas because we don't really even know much about the Olmecs or how some of their stuff came to be, and that was the culture who probably came before them, and in that region. And then you have stuff in the Olmec society that appears like the giant heads that have features that are not indicative of people native to that region. And so you don't really know like the Olmecs could have been people who actually trekked all the way from Africa at one point, or at the very least actually came from Asia to the Americas, based on what you see in those statues and those monoliths they have of the faces. Because those are very. If you look at those Olmec monoliths, those are very. They look like either like Polynesian or possibly African, but something in the kind of from Africa to Asia and the southern hemisphere probably. As far as features go, they're not really congruent with features from other regions as far as we know. And you have some other things that would kind of link some of those places as well. Like you have pyramids in Africa and you have pyramids in South America and Central America as well. Albeit they're
America as
different.
well.
They're different types of pyramids, but you do have some cultural similarities that bleed over from the two. And we don't know that those things are tied, but there could be some tie-ins with those. It's very hard to say because there's not really sufficient evidence to go either way on that. But
Yeah, I think the standard way to explain that would be it's the most efficient way to build a large structure that isn't going to collapse on itself. It's a large square base, increasingly increasingly getting smaller towards the top. But Mayan period pyramids aren't really true pyramids. They're step pyramids with a plateau or a temple on the top, typically,
right.
Right.
where people would perform sacrifices, different kinds of rituals.
Well, I guess just that concept of something that goes up on the sides towards a central vertices or central
Mhm.
vertices, however you say it,
Okay.
where it's going up towards the central point. Even if that point is cut off, that central point still, if you continue the lines on the sides, it still is going to go up to a central point. With that point being something that goes up towards the sky. I think kind of conceptually they're still
Yeah.
somewhere in that way.
They're still somewhere in that.
The concept of pyramids in most cultures are they're essentially creating mountains. I think that's the forget where I read that.
Well, and I would say even just to a casual observer, it seems to be the point seems to be that they're trying to get closer to the heavens. They're trying to be closer to the stars,
Yeah.
and that's a more holy location to a lot of ancient cultures, probably because you're closer to things that you relate to the divines, to the heavens. You have celestial bodies like Orion's belt, for example, up there, and you want to be closer to these things that you see reflected in the buildings and layouts of other different cultures across the world. there was definitely
You're right.
a high importance put on these.
I I personally have never seen a night sky unobstructed by light pollution, and I can sort of imagine how a natural starlight could really invoke the divine in ancient people.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, just like
That's got to be an amazing thing.
you have structures that are built to do certain
Absolutely.
things like
Just like
twice a year, just on the
built to
solstice.
certain things twice a year.
You know, the
Yeah.
light will shine a certain way. I want to say, doesn't Chichen Itza have a feature built in like that? I believe it does.
Um, I want to say it's the winter and summer solstices. A serpent on one end of the year.
It
The
looks like it's
serpent
rising or something,
will
right?
the shadow will slither up the pyramid, and on the
Yeah,
opposite side of the year, the serpent will slither down.
yeah,
And they say it's an unintentional feature, but there's a dragon's head right at the end of the steps.
right.
Right.
So it's if it was accidental, it's a pretty neat accident in
Yeah,
my opinion.
Yeah.
there are a lot of things that can be written off as coincidental that might not have quite been coincidental. I mean, these people were phenomenal astronomers,
These people are phenomenal astronomers.
and
Phenomenal architects too.
And
yeah, I mean both really, and I think
Yeah.
the two things were very tied into each other in a lot of regards. They
Mhm.
seem to have been for many ancient cultures, ancient and classical cultures.
A-
I don't think we do as
Astronomy
much with it in modern day, but in those times that was an important factor of things.
astronomy probably is what caused people to want to create large structures to mark those celestial events. It was important to them religiously, physically.
Yeah, it's true because I mean, with the connection to certain celestial events and whatnot, these things are almost monuments to those events, so much as they are to the express purpose of the monument.
Exactly.
So they do kind of wind up, in a sense, becoming monuments to those celestial bodies as well. Not, I mean, that may have very well been the intent in some cases. Also, it might not be really a byproduct so much as just that that's how we
it
interpret
might
it.
not be really a byproduct so much, just that's how we interpret it.
That could be true. Like I said before, it's kind of hard to interpret exactly what was going through a person's head that long ago when their culture is just so drastically different from ours.
True.
True.
Well, we know they like sports
You
at
know,
least. We have that in common with their culture.
Yeah, but they played sports with severed heads.
Yeah.
I think if you tried to do that today, you'd get into some trouble.
Well, and they also what they played was kind of a
they also
hybrid of basketball and soccer, but you couldn't use your hands or your feet.
kind of basketball.
Mm-hmm. And some those games would last days sometimes, which is I'm not sure the exact rules or how it was played, but I know that at the end result was that the winning team would be sacrificed.
Well, so what I heard about that, I was watching something about that recently, and what I heard was that the losing team was picked ahead of time to lose, and they were comprised of people that had been conquered
Comprised
in
of
war.
people that had been conquered before.
So these were
Really?
already prisoners, and they were already set to be executed. And this was just their method of execution, was that they had a staged game between like the ringer team, like the home team, the Mayan team, and then these
Mm-hmm.
conquered people who were gonna already be killed. So they would lose the game, and then they would be killed.
Oh,
So it was kind of like
I heard that it was.
It was for like
It's
pomp
like
and circumstance,
it was
basically. It was more of a
basically it was more
ceremonial sporting event. Kind of like
Mhm.
if you have to go jousting, but you have to joust against the king. Like you can't really take the king off his horse. I
Mhm.
mean, you probably don't want to at least because it's probably not going to work out well for you.
No,
So
not at all.
you probably want to just kind of do like you want to make a good show of it, but you
probably
don't want to
wanted
go
to
too
like,
hard,
you
you
don't
know.
want to go too hard.
But this
Mhm.
was kind of like okay, so you probably want to not go too hard against the Mayans, so it's not worse for you, but but you also you know you're gonna lose in the end. So they've already told you you're taking a dive, you're just not getting a payout for it.
Yeah. I mean, the payout either way is going to be death.
And
Whether
then
it's quick or slow is probably
And
the
well,
option.
that's the payout we all get anyways, isn't it? So it's just when it comes and how it comes. But
Hmm.
and it's interesting too. I read that a lot of their sacrifices were children, and
That's true.
that's not something that you would necessarily think of. I don't think right away. You would probably assume that they're not, but a lot of them seem to have been children.
seem to have been children.
It may have. I'm not too familiar with the Mayans on that, but I know that the Aztecs, it depended on which god you were sacrificing to, and probably also the time of the year. Some gods would have demanded sacrifices of virgins, like children,
Okay.
and other gods, or in different times, like say in times of war, you'd be sacrificing warriors from neighboring villages,
Okay.
captive
Okay.
warriors, people who were bested in battle.
So that would be
So there's
like
also that.
their sports season.
Like their sports.
Hmm.
Yeah. So that's like they go to war and then they have basketball season after.
Well, I think war was kind of a sport to them,
Yeah. Yeah, they were kind of constantly at war,
at least
right?
with.
Yeah, they were kind of
They really
Mm-hmm.
were kind of a culture of contrast in that sense that they were like they were
constant.
building and they were doing astronomy, but they were also doing human sacrifice and very warlike. It's something, you know, like in farming and like these things don't seem like they would all work together. Maybe that kind of was what led to their demise over time as well. That might just be the perspective that we have from today, but you know, to me that seems like those things kind of are not necessarily intuitive to each other.
Necessarily intuitive to each other.
Um, I mean, we're kind of similar today. You know, we build telescopes and computers, and we create art, and at the same time, we drone strike villages in other countries. So I feel like culture in general is just a broad kind of a
That's true.
broad
I think they were just a
term.
complex culture,
Everybody's going to
probably.
be anything.
I think they were just a complex culture.
They were
Probably.
more
Yeah,
complex than we
definitely.
would
They're
expect them to
more
be
complex
based
than
on how we view past cultures. But I think we find that to be the case with many ancient and classical cultures that we view now. So we look at them kind of through a lens from the modern perspective of things. That everything is supposed to be unsophisticated and barbaric and incapable of doing anything. And we find more and more that it's just not the case. So.
we find more and more it's just not the case. So
I agree. And barbarism kind of just goes hand in hand with humanity. It's just part of what we are.
Well, I mean, yeah. At the end of the day, we're all animals, so we're going to act as such. You know, we can elevate ourselves from it and distance ourselves from it as much as possible, but we can't deny what we are. We're still going to be animals at the end of the day. Even if we're animals with podcasts, we're still animals.
That's true.
All right, so I think I'm gonna go ahead and wrap things up here. I'm running out of things to talk about on this. Do you have any closing thoughts, Ryan?
Um, none that I could think of. I think we're pretty much good.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening in. This has been Wisdom of the Immortals, and we will see you next
Everybody,
time where we'll be talking about ancient libraries. Thanks.
Immortals, and we'll be talking about ancient libraries.